Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome to Michelle Boyde, who is sitting right now in Miami, Florida, who is an Aussie, but when you listen to this lady speak, she has an accent that comes from what we call in Australia the motherland or the homeland, which is from the UK. Michelle, great to have you on the podcast.
Lovely to be here, Darren. Yes, I am a Pommy by birth, but I am a bona fide Aussie these days. You gave me the passport and everything, so yeah.
Now, I must ask you, when you were, because you mentioned before that your parents live in Florida, your sister lives in
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
So you're spending some time over there at the moment and doing some travel stuff, which we'll get into because I love to ask you, what made you do this? But I was going to say, the people in America, do they say, "Oh, are you from Australia or are you from the UK?" Is there a question mark over the accent?
They tend to think I'm British. Yeah,
Right.
they tend to hear that. But when I talk to English people, they're like, oh, you got a twang. So apparently I do go up at the end of my sentences. And of course, there's lots of Aussie words. I'm calling things capsicums and eskies and all this kind of stuff, which people look at me as if they've got absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. But I do sound, I guess more British. And of course, because I've been hanging out with my parents for a few weeks.
Yes.
And they still have a very strong English accent. I think it's tuned in even more. So yeah, they think I'm English.
Love it. Love it. Now, you're a master hypnotist and liminal guide, but you've also got a really extensive experience in corporate. I always love to delve into my guest's background in terms of what they've done, where they've come from, and what they do now, and what specifically led them to do what you do now. So I'd love to know from you, because I know you spent a lot of time in corporate, but just a little bit about your background, what you used to do, and specifically what led you to do what you do now.
Yeah, so my background was I was a brand and culture strategist. And so what that meant was I'd go in and I'd work with C-suite and leaders. If this is the business strategy, what's the culture we need to land it into to be able to deliver it? And then how do we develop interventions to shape that culture through the lens of the brand? So that was what I did for almost 15 years. And, it was very interesting and it was very cerebral. I met so many fantastic, very smart people. But if I'm really honest, I felt like I kept coming up against a lot of slow moving stuff. You'd write great strategies. Everyone would say that's fantastic. It wouldn't be implemented because everybody would lose their nerve often around truly implementing stuff. And when you just sort of feel like, I don't know if I'm having as much impact as I want to. And so, I have to confess, I waited till I got my permanent residency because all people who've moved over to Australia, we're all tied in with our visas. And when I got my PR, I thought, I'm out, I'm gone. So I didn't know where I was going. I'd literally saved up what I call the Freedom Fund so that I could continue my life in Sydney while I worked out what was next. And, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to train as a coach. And it took a while to find the right qualification because as we know, there is a lot of coaches and there's great coaches and there's very mediocre coaches. So I wanted the right qualification. And when I found that and I started that, my very first qualification within that was a hypnotist qualification. And it was just, I was like, okay, that's part of it. I didn't think too much, went along, did the training and absolutely fell in love with it and said, you know what, this is the bit that's me. And it's kind of gone from there. So I'd never planned to become a hypnotist, but I fell in love with it.
Now, when we say hypnotist, because sometimes when people hear that, they say, oh, do you hypnotize people to walk around and pretend to be a chicken? Are you like a stage hypnotist, or is it more about the power of language?
Exactly. Yes. No, I feel like I do spend a lot of time reassuring people that I don't have a pendulum in my pocket and I'm not going to get them to do anything that they don't want to do. But yeah, power of language, performance, therapeutic processes, and also so much getting rid of pain in the body. Got rid of tinnitus for people before, people who haven't slept for 4 years and been insomniacs are sleeping again, as well as then obviously, deep work around getting people to perform better in their life as well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, it's a fantastic process. It's so much fun to do.
And was there something, because having spent 15 years in corporate working with a lot of C-suites and executives and helping them probably through the transition of where they are to where they want to be or where they need to be or where the company
Mhm.
thinks they need to be. Was there a specific catalyst as, hey, there's a lot more deeper work that's going on here that was the, I guess, the reason why you explored the coaching and the hypnotism phase?
Yeah, yeah, because we can operate very much at an organizational level, but as we know, everything fundamentally comes back to what's happening with individuals. And when you've got lots of individuals who are all got the right mindsets, got the right behaviors all lined up, then you start to get the impact. And one of the challenges I think in those environments, and it's not anybody's fault, but it's that we go outside of ourselves all the time for more concepts, more expertise, more capability, more frameworks, and it's all from the neck upwards. It's
Mm,
all up there. And even if we talk about culture, which is obviously mindsets and behaviors, we're always talking about it from our heads.
mm,
And the real gap and the real possibility and potential that sits, I believe, in a lot of businesses and a lot of people is the ability to drop that from their heads down into their bodies. And the work I do is in the liminal, I call it the liminal space. So I work with people who've they're not who they were, they've
mm,
shed that version of themselves, and they're heading for this other version of themselves, but they're not there yet. They haven't fully embodied it, and they're in that really weird in between where you feel a bit uncomfortable, and you start to really doubt yourself. Your inner critic is really loud, and that's the space that I work with people in. And of course, that's what's happening for people who've been fantastic salespeople, but they're actually leaving that identity of just being the high flying salesperson behind, and they're stepping into that I'm actually a leader within a sales team as well. And so much of that is not just being up in their heads, but dropping
mm,
into their bodies. Because, when we talk about, integrity in leadership, for example, which is obviously something that comes up a lot, we want to follow somebody who has integrity. And a lot of time we talk about that being someone who's, it's a good thing. Integrity is a good way of operating. But if you actually, again, you look into what the word integrity means, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this, it's about wholeness. It's
mm,
about strength. An engineer, when they create something with integrity, it's something that's strong.
mm.
And if we are operating all up here above our head, then we do not have integrity with our bodies. People pick it up. They pick it up
Yep.
immediately.
It's almost like this misalignment because people can say
Mm.
things. But and I was having this conversation yesterday with a group, and we were talking about the impact of your communication, and I was citing Albert Mehrabian, who's been studying this for 60 years, and the fact that how we speak and the body language we use when we speak often creates a completely different message as compared to just the words that people speak, and we focus
Yeah.
so much time on what to say to people, but don't spend near enough time thinking about, well, how do I bring those words to life through my
Mm.
tonality and through my physiology, and that is my full experience. And it's
Yeah.
simple things like where do I place my hands? Where do I look? Where do I look at people?
Mm.
What happens to
Yeah.
my tonality in terms of do I put pauses in or whatever? So
Mm.
it's so important to think about that. I
Mm.
did want to go back one step because you mentioned
Yes,
before we
do.
press record that you said, "Oh, I'm going to pack up." And I think you said you've literally sold everything you've got
I
and said,
have.
"Right, I'm out of here."
I have. So I got rid of my house. I've sold my Subaru Forester. I got rid of literally everything I own. I've either given it away or sold it, furniture, belongings. All I did was I shipped one sort of standard size suitcase actually over here to my parents with kind of yearbooks, old photographs, the irreplaceable kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And then I left Australia with a backpack, kind of not bigger than that. And I've kind of gone off to see what happens. Oz has been amazing. It has my heart. I feel Australian, but I don't feel like my next stage is in Australia. So
Yeah,
I'm off to
okay.
see. I'm off to see where I land.
Do some exploration,
Yeah.
which is really interesting because well, I was talking about it. I was talking about a previous guest we just had on who was
Mm.
phenomenal. We're talking about paradigm shifting and identity and changing and so forth, and all this manifestation stuff that a lot of people say, "Oh, that's just woo-woo rubbish," but there's
Yeah.
actually a science behind it.
There
And
is.
as you were talking
Mm.
and sharing that with me before we press record, I was just recalling a friend of mine who has done a similar thing. He hasn't sold his
Mm.
house, but he had a breakup, unfortunately, with his partner, and then thought, well, now is the best time for me to go and explore the world. So he's actually experimenting with this digital nomad concept and
Mm,
spending time internationally. And a great thing about running your own business and the services that we provide is you can literally do it anywhere. So it doesn't mean you
yeah.
have to be stuck in an office somewhere doing it. You can just do anything.
Mm.
So good on you because it's a paradigm shift.
It is. It's a really big one. So I'm in my own liminal space because I feel like there's this other version of me emerging. And it's one of the reasons I got rid of everything, partly
Mm,
because everything you put in storage, you get it back out and you look at and you go, I have no idea why I put this in storage. But also because I know that all that stuff, it kind of belongs to the version of Michelle that I've been shedding.
mm,
And what I will add to it as well, because, I'm really big on what's happening in people's bodies.
yeah.
We talk about the conscious, we talk about the subconscious, but this body part, your body, as we know, is talking to you all the time.
Mm,
And my body was so restless the last 18 months before I left Australia. And I had so many physical things crop up. And I must tell you this story if you're
please.
interested.
Yeah.
So I this was back in April last year, so just over a year ago. I had a Thursday and it was like lunchtime and I was absolutely exhausted, like ridiculously exhausted, to the point that I went to bed at like 4 p.m. and I woke up and I had been absolutely fine. I woke up on the Friday and I couldn't walk.
Couldn't walk.
I couldn't walk. My knees didn't bend. So I wasn't able to walk because my knees would not bend. I was in pain. I was absolutely exhausted. My friend took me off to emergency. I still always want to call it A&E and casualty, emergency in Aussie terms. And they took me in and they were a bit like, well, we don't, to be honest, really know what to do with you, but we're going to take some blood tests. And then head off home, just sort of monitor it for a few days and go to your GP and get your blood tests. Anyway, what it materialized was I had Ross River virus. I don't know if you're familiar with Ross River because not everyone is.
Yeah, no,
And
I've heard of it, and I don't know personally people know, but I know there's some professional golfers back in the day that I used to follow golf a lot who had Ross River. Yeah, and that was
so it's
debilitating.
Oh, it's so debilitating. I'm absolutely fine now, by the way. But it was really, really bad. And I had the whole kind of first 12 weeks, I could barely walk. For the first 2 months, I couldn't pick anything up off the ground.
Yeah,
So I felt like I was fast forward into this is what I'm going to be like in my 80s and my 90s. If I don't look after my mobility, it was really quite it was a bit of a shock. It's really difficult if you live on your own and you drop something on the floor because you're trying to
yeah,
work to get to it without bending your knees. It's really tricky. But the bit that I wanted to talk about with this was there was a bit of an outbreak of Ross River, which didn't know about, but not everyone gets Ross River. So it's
yeah.
not,
Okay.
if you're bitten by a mosquito that's carrying it, it doesn't mean that you will contract it.
Yeah.
A few days before this, I had literally been saying out loud to a friend that I was feeling crippled, that I was feeling contracted, that I felt that I wasn't really where I wanted to be physically. And then literally several days I wake up and I was actually crippled. And if and we know this, the power of our words and the ability of our body to respond to the verbal cues and the thoughts that we provide are absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. And I can talk even more about some of the stuff that was happening in my body last 18 months before I got a very clear signal outside of myself, which was like, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time. Oz has been great. It's
Yeah.
complete. Time to go.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you got your permanent residency now, so you can always come back. So that's all
I'm a,
good.
I'm a citizen. I got the passport.
But isn't that interesting how
So
and how many
interesting.
people and probably you go back to the work you're doing in brand and strategy and how many
Yeah.
executives you're working with that had perhaps an identity crisis. They were trying to become or try to give an impression they're somebody that they're not to fill the, I guess, the expectations of other people on how they thought they needed to be. And how many of
Mhm.
those people had to deal with some sort of either mental or physical challenge.
Oh, so many. We know, if I hit my hand against the wall or something, that's why my hand hurts.
Yeah.
But when you get all these mystery aches and pains and, your digestion's playing up or you've got pains in your shoulders, but you haven't been carrying anything, or you start to develop a little bit of a rash or there's something,
Mm,
where are these things coming from? And it's your subconscious mind, it's your body saying, hey, not that cool with what's happening right now. And as we know, it gets louder and louder until you end up losing your ability to walk because you've not been listening to what your body's saying, which is, we don't want to be here, or we don't want to be here in this way.
Yes. Or there's a need to change and make a change. You need to listen
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
Mm.
So and I know you talk a lot about emotional intelligence around this. It's being in tune with your own feelings. It's being in tune with what's normal for you
Mm.
and what's not, and listening to that, but also embracing it
Mm.
and then doing something with it.
Yeah, it is. It really, really is. And it's also so much about desire.
Mm,
I think that a lot of people don't allow themselves to truly tap into what they want. And then they don't allow themselves to follow those desires. And I think in a lot of ways, we're a lot simpler than we think, as in our body wants us to follow our desires. And you can only shut those desires off for so long. And
yeah.
then they start to talk really loudly.
Well, it becomes almost like a volcano, Michelle, doesn't it? So it's just this
It
build
does.
up of pressure, and if we're not going to listen to it, then something will happen. Your body will tell you, "Hey, if you're not going to listen to this, if you're not going to
Mm,
take the opportunity, then I'm going to create a a pain in the shoulder or a pain in the
mm.
knees or that little mosquito. Yep, that's the one. It's got my number on it."
Yeah, completely. And I mean, when you lose the ability to walk properly for 3 months, especially when you're not of an age when you would be expecting to lose your ability to walk, it's really quite a big slap in your face. You have to kind of stop and go, hey, what's happening here?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's then talk about that as a foundation, because I know you've done a lot of work with obviously corporates and working with people now, helping. Would you call
Mhm.
it like an identity shift, or is it almost like a transformation transition? How would you normally? So when you're talking about the liminal space and going from where I am today, creating a new identity or enhancing an existing identity, how do you describe it?
I usually talk about becoming who you're meant to be.
Yeah.
It's one of those big shifts where it's almost one of those milestone identity points in life where you feel like when you step into that person, it opens up a whole completely new phase. So it's not one of those kind of, because most of us are upgrading our identity on a relatively ongoing basis, and we talk about growth mindset and all of that,
Mm,
that's happening. But I feel like these liminal spaces, and this is what I see in my clients, have those big shifts. It's when you really have to have quite a big overhaul of who you are to be able to be that person. And
mm,
that person that you're looking at you're really excited by the prospect, even if you can't quite put your hands around every aspect of who they're going to be,
mm.
but they do feel quite far away at the beginning.
And so with that, I'd be interested in knowing from your perspective some of the challenges that people have, and whether particularly in corporate, and we look at this all the time. You've got a salesperson, for example, who's an extraordinary salesperson, and with that, they would form some form of reputation, profile, let's just say identity. I am a extraordinary or an exceptional salesperson. And
Mm,
often the company will then look at that person and say, "Wow, Michelle, you're an extraordinary salesperson. We are now going to
mm,
bestow upon you, my friend, sales leadership. And we're going to now give you a team of 10 people to now handle, which
mm,
requires you to make a shift in your approach, dare I say, your
mm.
identity." So, how
Yeah.
much of the challenge is with people having to, I guess, make a change based on how other people see them as
Mm.
distinct from how they see themselves?
I think it's actually a lot more about how they see themselves, even though I don't think that's what people think. So I think people that their go-to space is how are other people going to perceive me, and what do I need to do externally, expertise, things I need to demonstrate, etc., to create that gravitas in this new role. But no, I think a lot more is actually about who I am and how I feel. And so to give this as a bit of an example, and again, I'm sure you feel the same. I'm quite sensitive to language because of how important language is. And we've got this world now where, especially because people talk a lot more about, for example, emotional intelligence, you'll have people saying, oh, I feel this. And you're like, you
Mm,
haven't told me what you feel, you've told me what you think.
yes.
But the two that I'm interested in here is thinking and believing, and how what you think isn't necessarily what you believe.
Yeah.
And the way I would talk about it is that things you think can be situational, but when something is a belief, it isn't situational. So if we make that tangible, like you say, I'm a fantastic salesperson, and you feel, worthy of the respect that you've got. And so
Yeah.
when you're in that role and you're in those rooms, you feel that way. You have the experience of being a fantastic salesperson and good at your job.
Yeah.
And then we move you out of that role. We move you into a new job title. You're suddenly sitting in slightly different rooms, and you no longer have the experience of feeling that you are great at your job and you're a great salesperson and a great leader. And so actually, you never really believed that. You thought that. But this is what the liminal really asks you, in my opinion, is it's asking you to really land the stuff that you think about yourself and to truly, truly believe it and drop it deeply down into your body. And I tend to find that there's sort of three big groups of things that we like to think, but we often don't truly believe, that really start to bubble up. So there's the bucket, which is all the worth value stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the bucket, which is the all to do with your power and what's possible. And the other one is all to do with responsibility. You know, anytime you move up into a new version of yourself, there is always, whether you're technically becoming a leader on paper or not, there's always this new level of responsibility that we have to embody. And it's not just through the actions and the words, but it's actually what we believe about the responsibility that we hold inside ourselves.
And when people do that, because often I'll always say that you almost have to truly believe, and I know a lot of people say fake it until you make it, which I find fascinatingly ridiculous because it presupposes that you just well, at its core, you're just faking it. But I always say you've got to act as if, which means, okay, if you're a salesperson right now, and I use my own example as a case study here, that when I made the transition from an individual salesperson to a sales leader, when it actually happened, I went from an individual contributor in a team that I was peers to then becoming the sales leader of the same team that I was a peer the day before.
Yeah.
But for the
Tricky.
previous 2 years, I had been working on what is my leadership philosophy? What is my leadership identity? Who is it I'm going to become so that I could be worthy of the responsibility that's going to come with that title, right? So I said, you need to act as if, which means you've got to work on what's the characteristics and what is the worth you have for yourself. What is the responsibility you're going to now start to take on? What's the thinking patterns you're now going to adopt? So that when the opportunity comes, you're going to be ready to adapt to the responsibility that's now in the I guess in the physical form when it arrives.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I talk very much about, and it's very similar in a lot of ways, because you're holding a new standard in this new version of
Mm,
yourself. There's a new standard. And a lot of the things you've spoken about are all parts of that standard. And what is often quite tiring, actually, when you're trying to make that transition, is that your body is not used to holding that standard all the
mm,
time. And
mm.
so you hold the standard sometimes in certain scenarios. And then there's other times when you find yourself struggling to hold that standard. And so the real kind of tangible practice is keep holding the standard of
Yes.
that new person that you're becoming all the time. And of course, the more you do it, the more you hold the standard. There's less time in a day and a week when you're not holding the standard. And then there reaches that point when you just hold that standard all the time.
Yeah.
And that's when you then fully, in my opinion, stepped into that role and that version of yourself.
Yeah. Which is almost like, would you use the analogy of the cocoon where you have the eventually the butterfly, but it doesn't start as a butterfly, and it's this transformation that happens over time, and it's the what is it? The law of is it the law of gender or law of transmutation, whatever the law
Mm-hmm.
is, that there's going to be struggle, and when you when you are breaking through, because it's said that never help a butterfly extricate itself from a cocoon because more than likely they're going to die because they develop the strength in the transformation through the struggle of going from old world to new world.
100%. And I actually think when they go into the cocoon, they end up as goo first. They turn
Yeah.
into goo
Okay.
before they then reform into a butterfly. And I was actually reading a much better analogy to do with frogs. It was, I
Okay.
mean, the butterfly one is good, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it was, which is really frustrating. But that is also, it descends into, and the reason why I loved that one, a bit like the butterfly one, is because I do feel in that period, you often feel a bit of a mess
Mm,
because the way that I would describe all this stuff that you need to fully land in your body, it's a bit like a horror movie
mm,
when you have that moment when the monster kind of comes up over the cliff that one last time, and the arm comes up and it tries to drag you back, right? It tries to drag you back into that old identity of who you are, that old version. And so it comes up, you know, as much as it possibly can. So, your self-sabotager comes up, your inner critic comes up, all the self-doubt. Have I made a mistake taking this job? Can I actually do it? Everything comes up and it's as loud as it's ever been. And so, yeah, there's a lot of emotional regulation. You haven't got the capacity to hold those standards. And so it can feel very stressful, and you can feel like you are on a real emotional roller coaster. And of course, the challenge is you're there kind of holding a vision of yourself in that team that you're now leading amongst your new peers. And that's tiring as well. But it's part of the process. You can't escape it.
Well, it is. And how much of this do you think imposter syndrome comes into this, right? Do you see imposter syndrome as part of a transformation, or is imposter syndrome something that is a different thing that we should be focusing on and working on strategies to either eliminate or minimize?
I see it's part of the transformation. If you're not experiencing a level of imposter syndrome, then you're not moving to a different place, because there's got to be a gap between where you are and where you're going. And I always think whenever there's a gap, that's the bit that's emotionally charged.
Yes.
And once we get that part that's emotionally charged, that's when we start getting up all the stories, the narratives, and etc. starts to begin to bubble up into the surface. And if you are not there yet, then there will always be a part of you that's going, hey, can we actually do this? Are we good enough to do this bit? So I think imposter syndrome is just part of that process. And
Yeah.
as you start to more deeply land how you feel in yourself about what you're worth, about your power, about your responsibility, etc., it disappears. And as you gain more proof, always.
And the only way to gather proof is to do things, to
It's true.
take
Yeah.
action, right? So, and
Mm.
I often say to teams that I'd much rather you take the imperfect action with an intention of improving, delivering a result, but don't put too much pressure on having to achieve the result than just sitting there and thinking about it. Because when you think about it, you're not
Mm.
actually taking any action, you're just thinking, right? So
Yeah,
so
completely.
and you said it before really well that often we spend so much time in our own heads that we
Mm.
confuse ourselves and not necessarily take action. So you can think and you can think and you can think, but until you do something, nothing happens.
Mm. Well, and this is the example I give. So, I talk a lot about embodiment, but I be honest, I dislike the use of the embodiment that's been kind of picked up too much by the conscious community, and it's everything's embodiment and floating. And I've been living in Byron for a few years, so I feel like I've
Okay.
so much of that. But like, so I use surfing. Let's use surfing because we're both Aussies as well. I think this is the best example of it. Yeah. It's really easy actually to understand how to surf. Like, it's not complicated to understand, how a rip current functions, where you position yourself on the wave, what you're supposed to do when the board lifts, blah, blah, blah. That's all
Yeah.
really, really easy, right? But we all know that surfing is a completely different ball game when you're in the water. But what you're doing when you embody something is you're taking something that you understand with your head and you're
Mm,
actually running it through your body. That is embodiment. So
mm,
you are not a surfer unless you get on a board and you get out there and you actually run all the stuff you learn through your body. You
yes.
actually have to use your body, which is the
Yeah.
taking action part. And this is where so many people get stuck, is they are almost too focused on just this sort of intangible development and learning and not applying. So I'm with you on that completely.
Because I see a lot of people who do a lot of reading. They're I guess a student of either personal or professional development. They might learn something and hey, let's
Mm.
use a corporate example of I've done an MBA.
Oh,
I
yeah.
now have an MBA to my name. I can now put on my LinkedIn profile, Darren
Mm.
Mitchell, MBA. I've made it,
Yeah.
right? Now, with the greatest amount of respect, it doesn't mean diddly if you haven't applied things you've learnt in the MBA. And the MBA is not the piece of paper. The MBA should be the method of thinking that you can apply to situations to deliver a different result. And through that process, you manifest into a different identity so that you can be more effective
Mm.
in what you do. So
Yeah.
you've got to do stuff. You've got to take action.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually I wrote an Instagram post, it was a while ago now, but it was to the effect that this constant personal development, this constant learning, another podcast, another course, another workshop, another masterclass, whatever it is just ultimate self-sabotage.
Interesting.
Because
And
unless you're using the stuff, you're just holding
true.
yourself in the same space.
It's true.
You've
Because
got to apply it.
and this is where you talked before about you're in your head, right? So if you're in
Mm,
your head, not in your body, so the body actually then the embodiment as you've just spoken about is you need your body to actually take action.
yeah.
But if you're in your head just gathering information, and this is where a lot of people think, well, knowledge is power. I don't believe that's true. Knowledge can give you confidence, but it's
Mm,
only until you actually apply the power to the knowledge through the actions that you take do you actually
yeah.
realize, well, was that powerful for me or was it just knowledge?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And the kind of the way that we con ourselves with this is that we think that we're taking forward motion
Mm,
because I am sourcing more information, et cetera, et
mm,
cetera. But you're not actually putting it into action. You're actually just stalling yourself exactly where you are. And you do unfortunately see this in big companies just generally. You'll see another deck put together. You'll see another audit, another analysis. No one bites the bullet and does the thing that needs to be done. But we're all so busy putting together different decks that
mm.
we all feel that we're taking forward motion, but we're not actually really moving forward. It's not like that everywhere, but we know that there is some of that in organizations.
Well, my own experience, having been in corporate for 20 plus years and worked with
Mm,
corporates outside of corporate for the last 10 years, that still happens. In fact, I used
yeah.
to work at a company and I won't reveal, I'll just give you the initials. It was Telstra.
So subtle.
And hey, but what you just said is so true. We could not have, when I was running sales teams at Telstra, and we literally could not have a meeting with other departments, or in some cases with senior leaders, without a PowerPoint deck was like an inch thick.
Yeah.
And it was almost
Yeah.
like if you didn't come with a PowerPoint deck to a meeting,
Mm,
then the interpretation there was you were not prepared.
yeah.
So of course, when I walk in and start to do some facilitation and start having some conversations and use whiteboards, they're thinking, "Hang on, what's going on here? This is not how we
Yeah.
do things here." But it was flawed thinking, right? And we have to
Mm,
go through I guess the transformation and learn that it's not just about doing the PowerPoint deck because the intelligence is not sitting in there. It's about what are we going to do and how are we going to change our entire narrative and who we are that we best represent the company and the individuals within the company. Um,
yeah.
Staggering,
Mm, yeah. I
absolutely
completely
staggering.
agree with you there. Yeah.
So, in the work that you do now, then um, I'd love to understand I guess the process that you take people through,
Mm,
from where
yeah.
people are, whether they're a sales leader, whether they're an executive, whether they're an entrepreneur, from where they are now to where they say they want to be. Now,
Yeah.
without giving away the trade secrets, but some of the key concepts, because before we press
Yeah.
record, we talked about three things. Obviously, integrity, desire, but also from a
Mm,
selling perspective, the
mm,
contribution that we're making, which is not just the sales number.
yeah.
So just thinking through that, what are some
Yeah.
key ideas, strategies, or tactics that we can help people with?
Yeah. So I would say we can split my work just for context into two buckets. So there is the hypnotic and the somatic work, which is working down in your body with the beliefs and who you are. And then I do the strategy side of things. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, I work with a lot of leaders who want to have a completely different perspective and redesign also the type of work and the type of legacy that they leave. So they're the kind of two areas that I really work in.
Hmm.
What I would say is potentially is a little nuance to my work that I do with people's bodies is that I've moved less away from let's identify all the limiting beliefs that you have. And as you probably find, when you have really smart people who've done lots of personal development, they roll up and they can tell you every single one of their limiting beliefs. They know they've got a label. I'm anxiously attached. This happened because of the relationship I had with this parent. And they've got it all mapped out, and yet they still can't quite create
Yeah.
the change that they want. And so I actually drop very quickly into their body. So I will bring online their desire or their vision and find the very specific part of the body that is going, I am not on board with that. And then actually working with that part of the body specifically. And so, what I would say to, these people who've stepped up into these leadership roles and imagining these sales teams, is there is this vision of me as a leader of a sales team. And actually, when we bring that close to your body, there's part of your body that's going to react to it. And that's the part of the body that we'd actually go in and we would focus on. So that's just a little bit that I would say about the work that I do there. I like to get straight into people's bodies because I feel a lot of us do an awful lot of talking, and the wisdom is in the body. But there's another piece that I just think is quite interesting with salespeople in particular, because if you come from a sales role, what is great about being a salesperson is it's very easy for you to demonstrate your value to an organization because you are the person bringing in the dollars, right? And so most salespeople, especially the ones that I've come across and I've worked with, they're very focused on the sales KPIs, as they should be, because they are the channel that bring the sales into the organization. And, when you're stepping into a leadership role, yes, that's still going to be a focus, but there is actually a lot else that sits around that in terms of how you can also contribute to the bottom line that isn't just the actual sales of products and services. And when you start to look at some of those levers and you start to incorporate those, I believe that makes you a more holistic and effective leader of salespeople as well. And so, to talk about that briefly, what I'd say is there's really three key things to an environment that you want to be driving as a leader. So one of them is focus. So it's what are we actually focusing people on? Are we creating an environment of empowerment? And are we creating an environment of people feeling fulfilled? And the reason for that is once you create focus, what you create at the back end of that is productivity. So if we are focusing people directly in on the correct places to place their energy, we're going to get higher productivity. And when we drive higher productivity, we drive better efficiencies and we drive better innovation. Both have dollar values attached to them. Innovation drives dollars up, efficiency drives them down, right? When we've got people who feel that they're more empowered, they're able to make a bigger contribution. And then that contribution goes on to affect things such as customer experience. And it also goes on to affect, employee experience in the organization as well. And then when we look at fulfillment, we're actually driving advocacy, which again contributes to sales, but it also drives to advocacy around products and services and the experience in the team as well. So you can actually start to, as a leader, talk about other things other than just the sales that we're bringing in that allow you to also have a bottom line conversation. And there are levers that drive those things. And I think that's an interesting space as well for leaders to step into when they've generally always been focused on what's the sales pipeline, what are we delivering revenue wise, which still is the most valid thing. But actually, there's that piece as well. And salespeople aren't used to having those conversations because they haven't had to justify their value outside of sales generally.
Well, it's interesting you say that because often when I work with sales leaders and their teams, I'll be having conversations about what is the true value. And a lot of them, when I ask them what is their true value proposition, for the vast majority of them, they revert back to the product they have and why their product is more superior than their competitors. They don't actually start to look at, well, in essence, the true value proposition is themselves and how they make their customers feel and how they deliver their services and so forth. But it's very challenging because the sales number, whether it be a top line number, a bottom line number, a margin number, it's easy to measure because it's quote unquote tangible. What's harder to measure is the intangibles, right? The focus, the behavior, the thinking patterns, the how you see yourself, how you prepare, how you walk into a room, what's going on inside your head. But that is what will drive the number. So have you found, and do you find when you're working with some of these organizations that that is a bit of a not so much a preventer of success, but a challenge that you've almost got to help elevate the thinking away from just the pure number?
I think across the board, there's an understanding that you've got to do more than that, that it's more than just the number. But of course, only when the number's there, because if the number's not there, then we're not interested in the other stuff. If we're truly honest, if we're truly honest. I think the tricky thing comes, and it always is the thing, is okay. So how do we create focus? How do we create all these things that I've listed, and how do we create culture? And there is actually some great levers available. And the advice I'd also give to the people listening who've stepped into these types of roles is learn to use things like the vision, the strategy, the purpose, the brand, and use them properly, because your job is actually translate them into your team.
Mm,
Because if you can take the vision and the strategy and you can translate it really well for your people, that's when you create focus.
mm,
When you are able to truly convey the purpose of the organization, not the product and the quality of the service, but the purpose of the organization and the attributes of the brand, that's when you empower people, because you don't empower people through the head, you empower people through the heart. And
yeah.
that's what purpose and brand is, all about. And then, when you're wanting to drive that fulfillment piece, that's where culture comes in and that's where capability comes in, because people don't feel fulfilled if they don't get to use the breadth of their capability. If you're in a role and you're using a bit of what you can do and the rest isn't appreciated, you do not feel fulfilled. So
Yeah.
you've actually got all of these levers, but a big part is the translation of those into your team. And that's where a lot of managers and a lot of leaders are just not skilled.
And I, for my own personal view, and this is based on my own experiences, I don't necessarily think or believe that it's their fault necessarily, because
No.
they're products of their environment. So people who are promoting or bring them into that leadership role have been brought into a leadership role based on performance and based on the metrics. So that's where the area of focus is. So
Mm,
that's the lens that everybody looks at the business at. And when you've got the senior leaders and the executive leaders that are focused on the same thing, then it becomes a pattern of behavior that distills down in the organization. And success only happens when the number is delivered. Versus
yeah.
if we can spend the time and build the culture and start to think about, well, why are we actually here? Right? What
Mm,
is our purpose? What is our vision? And how do we go to
mm,
market? And how do we have conversations and engage with customers and translate that vision, because people will
mm,
always say, and this is a catchphrase that people always can intellectualize, that people will do business with those who they know, they like, they trust, and also
yep.
who they remember, right? So how do we
100%.
become memorable? It is not about your product. But
Mm,
do you find, because I've found that a lot of companies place so much pressure on the teams to hit the short-term objectives because that's what equals success, that's where the focus and the energy goes, which means that people are not necessarily using their full faculties to express themselves and bring more value. But if they did,
mm.
would it be possible that the numbers would take care of themselves anyway?
I think yes. If you've got people focused on the right stuff, if you've got them engaged,
Yes.
because the engagement is the give a shit factor. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm not sure if it's to
No, you
swear,
can say
but
that.
it
You can say
is.
whatever you like.
And actually, what do you want your team to do? You want them to give a bit more of a shit, because then they
Yes.
work a bit harder, they push a bit harder, they push towards those numbers. So all of these things ultimately give you the outcomes, as long as it's all lined up correctly. I
Mm.
think the bit that's interesting, and you see this with values in organizations, and I've done so many values for so many organizations, right, is that they're often very aspirational,
Yes.
and it's very easy to live the values, follow the values when everything's going great, when the numbers are being hit, when there's no problems in the culture, when you've got enough FTE, etc., etc. But you actually find out people's real values the moment that nothing's going quite right, because then we revert. Then we can't kind of put that, this is how we operate. We revert back to the real values of the organization. And I think you see the same thing with leaders. It's very easy to be the great leader and uphold all the stuff when everything is going fine and it's going dandy. And
Mm.
yet when it gets a bit tricky, then leaders really revert to the way they make decisions, to the way that you really see their true level of emotional intelligence,
Yes.
etc., etc.
Yes.
I think that's important too.
But that takes courage, because it takes a leader to truly understand who they are, what they stand for, to live by those values where every other piece of evidence is saying you need to do something else.
Mm,
And it's like, okay, we're not, and I say to leaders all the time, you've got to own where you're at. You've got to be able to establish where reality is. And if reality is not a great picture, you've still got to
mm,
stand up and say it. So, as a classic example, I'm doing some work with an organization, and a fabulous organization, and we're coming to the end of one of the programs, and I had the senior execs do presentations yesterday about what they have learnt and what they've applied and how they've developed their own leadership identity over the course of the last 2 years. And one person stood up
Mm.
in the middle of those presentations because they only had 10, 15 minutes to present. Once the presentation had been done, this person stood up and said, "Hey, I just want to share with the group, I'm not prepared. I've just viewed some of the presentations that have been delivered, and I've just realized that I haven't prepared to the level that I know I can and then know I
Mm.
should. And it would be embarrassing for me to stand up and now deliver a presentation. So I'm going to ask for permission to take a stay of execution, I think was the words that he used, and do this at another time. And thankfully we've got another session, so it's all good. But
Yeah.
what I took from that was he probably wouldn't have been able to do that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But the culture that has been created and the development that each of the people have gone through, he
Mm.
now felt that at a time where that could be very vulnerable, he had the courage to stand up and say, you know what, I own it and I want to be exceptional, but
Mm.
right now this is not exceptional.
But it's that classic thing, isn't it? We like people that don't bullshit us, you know? Like that's who we trust, that's who we follow. And I love it no more than even when I've got the biggest experts out in front of me and they say, I don't know the answer to that question. I'll come back to you. Or, and they let the guard down. And I think, especially for newer leaders, they think they have to keep the guard up all the time.
Mm,
And it's this tension between this new version and then sometimes just being really honest and saying, I'm not as prepared as I wanted to be. I'm not feeling quite as good about this as I wanted to be. I might not know the
yeah,
answer to that. And it's actually so powerful because that's, the authentic bit. It's the I'm showing up as I am. And that
yeah,
gives everyone else permission to do the same thing.
totally. Because I look at this particular individual and I've worked with him for the last two years, and he's a fabulous guy, but he was always a little bit protective if I think back. But the fact that he now felt vulnerable enough to actually say that in front of his peers spoke volumes of how far he's actually come to the point where he can
Mm,
do that. And I said, mate, kudos to you for doing that because, you, to be honest, you wouldn't have done that
mm,
2 years ago.
yeah. And that's the embodiment piece. This is the bit, when I'm talking about drop it out your head and drop it down into your body. This is the difference between a team saying, oh, we're all about psychological safety and, it's safe for you to speak up and fail fast and blah, 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 blah.
Mm,
And then somebody actually being able to sit in the room and do it because
yeah,
they feel safe enough to do it in
totally.
themselves, in the room.
So,
Mm.
Michelle, what do you say? Because I fully concur with everything you've spoken about, and it's been a great conversation. What do you say to a leader who is operating in let's just say, a high pressure environment where it's all about the numbers? They intellectualize, they understand this, they understand that this is a journey, they understand that there's almost like a transformation that they have to go through, and therefore the team has to go through. But they say to us, you don't understand. My leader is riding me like a bucking bull. All they're interested in is the numbers. All they're interested in is what is our gap closure strategy. All they're interested in is what are we going to do to close this particular gap or this particular number this week or this month or this quarter. Um, they feel as if they don't actually have the bandwidth to be empowered,
Mm.
to be able to focus on the behaviors that will drive. It's almost like the instant gratification zone that I have to always be up here, right?
Mm.
What do we say to these people? Because I can appreciate that and I can empathize
Yeah.
with it because I've been there. And it's really hard when
Mm.
you're in it, where you've got leaders who don't see the way that we're seeing. All they're interested in is give me the bottom line.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, I can go to, talking about your nervous system, talk about managing stress, emotional capacity, etc. But I actually got a different way that I want to talk about this because I'm sure you've heard all those things before and people will hear those things and go, and we know hypnosis is great for stress, but there is another way. I'd actually say connect back into desire.
Hmm.
And I want to explain to you why I say this. So I want you to um, because what happens in these roles is it starts to be I don't have time, right? That's
Yeah.
often very much the I don't have time to do all the things that are now required of me.
Yeah.
So if you can move away from time and you can actually start moving into a space where you're actually using your energy more efficiently, then you start to open up more of your potential and you start to be able to really hold all this new stuff that we are being asked to do. So I want you to imagine we've got a graph, right? So we've got a y-axis with energy on, we've got an x-axis with time on, and we've got 4 quadrants, sort of thing we're looking
Yep.
at. So down here in this corner, we've got the stuff that we never make time for, and we don't have, energy for. And this is that stuff that's just, it's unimportant. So it's the
Yeah.
stuff that sits on the to-do list. We never get to it. So we can just ignore that stuff, right? Then over here, we've got the stuff that we always make time for, but we don't actually have a lot of energy for. And these are the obligations. So this
Yeah.
is all the stuff that we must, should, need to do. And you step into a new leadership role, and suddenly the obligations bucket starts to really fill up, right? You got more meetings, you got to do more reports, all of that kind of stuff, more team management. Up in this corner, we've got stuff we always make time for and we always have energy for. This is our priorities. Okay. That's the stuff we always get to. Then we've got this quadrant here. It's the bit we don't make time for generally, and we do have high energy for, and it's our desires. Now, the reason I say this is that when you've got really exceptional specialists, so whether it's an exceptional salesperson, it's an exceptional engineer, software developer, architect, doesn't matter what it is that when they're working as in their actual sort of discipline as such, they're up here. They focus most around priorities and desires. They're doing something they love as well.
Mm.
And that's when our energy flows. We have so much more capacity up here. But often people step into leadership roles and they start to function here. It's priorities and obligations.
Yeah.
And this is what I talk about creates an ordinary life, and it makes you an ordinary leader. And so even though it's going to sound like, oh, you're asking me to do something else, if you can start tapping back into the stuff you really desire and you love, you access energy in yourself that you lose when you're always just functioning around these timepieces. So if you can get back to that, and I talk about this is where potential sits. We really tap into our potential when we're up here, where we're actually structuring what we do around our energy and not just our time. So it might sound like an interesting response to that, but it's really powerful. We say we want passionate leaders. What always comes before passion is desire.
Yes.
And if you need evidence of that, think about a sexual romantic relationship. The passion only starts firing when there's some desire stoking it. So desire is so much more important in business and career than I think sometimes we forget it. I think when we get down into the minutiae of it, we forget it. And I'd say focus back in on your desire, because it will give you a surge of energy as a leader. And that then comes out of you to your team. And you also become that inspiring leader that you want to be.
Because you now become the true role model that people will not necessarily do what they're told, they'll do what they see.
Yeah.
Now, with that, then I'm sure that there has to be a level of courage to
100%.
tap into that, because there might be pressure from the senior executives to get you to refocus on the obligations and the priorities. And we have to almost create and you've got to keep those satisfied to some degree. But what we're saying
Absolutely.
is, how do we tap more and more into the desire? What is it that I want? Who it is I want to become? What is the example I want to set? What do I want to see start playing out in my team? How do I want my team to be starting to behave and things like that?
And how do I do the parts that I really want to do?
Yeah.
I know of a very, very, very good salesperson who ended up in a very senior leadership role in a big Australian organization. I won't say any more than that, but he literally lost his spark because he loved selling and he was
Yeah.
bloody good at it.
Mm.
And he was no longer really selling. He was managing some high profile relationships in this exec role, but he wasn't in doing the stuff that he really loved before. And he lost his spark. So yes, you've got things that you have to do, but also, if you have been truly given some remit as a leader, if you're empowered to really lead your team, you can restructure, you can move things around to make sure that not just yourself, but everyone else is also doing the stuff that they love. It's really important,
Which, if you think about that, that gives you true empowerment, because if you're placed in a leadership role, there's obviously a belief that the business has in your ability to get the results. Otherwise, why would you be there? So somebody somewhere has looked at your potential and said, hey, you have the capacity and the potential to really exponentially help us improve our results. So why would I, as a senior leader, want to keep dragging you back down into the priorities and the obligations? Why wouldn't I let you be empowered to create a new version of this team, so we can
Yeah.
actually be the catalyst for future change and exponential growth? Yeah, I get that. I get that. It
Yeah.
makes sense. Makes sense. So, as well, I'm
Mm.
just conscious of the time, and it's probably
Oh, yes.
nearly 10 o'clock in Florida.
It is. It's 10:05. It's all right. I had a nice
Well,
strong English brekkie tea just before to keep me firing.
nice. Well, I'm just going to say you're just getting started, so there's probably a whole host of other things you can be doing. Um, so as we bring this to a close, Michelle, what's if there was one piece of guidance for somebody that listening to this that could be something they could grab hold of and at least start creating a thread around that maybe starts the process of creating that new identity and making progress in that area, what would that be?
I would say tap into very strongly what your desire is, because any distortions that you're going to need to shift are going to be directly related to your desire about this new version of yourself, new version of your life, whatever it looks like.
Yeah.
Get really clear on the standards that are associated with this new desire and start holding those standards as much as you can. And when you notice that you've let a standard slip, whatever that might be, no judgment, just notice it and then change the behavior next time to hold the standard. And that's what I would say. And of course, hypnosis.
Well, we are. I remember the person that taught me master hypnosis. She said we're all walking around and operating on a daily basis in a
Mm.
deep state of hypnosis.
Well, we are a lot of the time, aren't we? We're on autopilot. We're just, yeah.
Correct. So we don't even think about it. Hey, I love
Mm.
that. Desire and standards and music to me is because I talk to leaders all the time about what is the desire you have, who is it you are, and who is it you want to be, but what specifically are the standards you're going to hold yourself to that you can demonstrate through role modeling. So absolutely brilliant. Hey, Michelle, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. For people who wanting to learn more about you, connect with you, and follow what you're doing, wherever you happen to be in the world, um, where's the best place for them to connect?
Well, so what I would say is there's obviously my website, which is michelleboyde.com. And Boyd has an E on the end because everybody
Yeah,
leaves that off and then you won't end up there. And if you wanted to kind of follow my travels, then Instagram, which is Michelle Boyde _hypnotist, would be the spot. But I do have something called the liminal archetype quiz. So if anyone is listening and they feel like I'm in that in between these two versions, you can take that quiz. It'll tell you your archetype and how to more quickly collapse that liminal space. And so I'll give you that link for you maybe to pop into the show notes, but it's
yeah,
michelleboyde.com/liminal archetype quiz. Unfortunately, it's long, but that's worth taking a look. So I'll send those to you and you can pop them in the show notes.
perfect, excellent. I'll certainly do that. And hey, can I thank you for reaching out? It's been a great conversation, and hey, good luck in your travels. You said,
Thank
is it
you.
Montenegro the next stop?
I'm going to check Montenegro out. Yeah. I'm feeling quite drawn there. So we'll see. Watch this space. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and chat to you as well.
Terrific. Have a wonderful Thursday evening.
Yes, you too. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.